Jason Reynolds, and I know that's not it. I was this close to saying welcome, but in many ways it's going to be just a welcome back. I know we've had a number of tours and conversations up and down the school. You've been out to Cali. How's it feel to be back home?
It's always good to be home. For various reasons. I mean, I sleep in. You know what I mean? It's always nice to find my own bed and to be in my own space, but also my mom is here. So I'm always, anyone who knows anything about me, which some of you probably do know that I have like this weird edible complex with my mother, right? And so I'm always, you know, like, so my whole life is like, all right, well, I can do all these things, but I need to make sure that I'm in the vicinity. So I can, you know, we all live our mother. So just make sure that she's good. So home is special for those reasons. I got my bed, my space, my apartment, and I have my family. And when you're on the road as much as I am, it seems so sexy to everybody else, but it's really pretty lonely. It's tough to be on an airplane every day. It's tough to be, when I was a kid I thought hotels were so amazing. But when you're forced to be in them every day, you realize, one, that even the nicest hotel is the same as the one that's not so nice. The lobby's just a little different. And they all smell like old cigarettes. They all, none of them are as comfortable as light. And the food is always, I mean, how much fried calamari can a person eat? And so this is the way my life is. And so everybody else is like, oh, you know what I mean? You want to grow, this must be amazing. And it is amazing. The opportunity is amazing. Details are a lot less romantic, and so home is a nice refill, even if I'm only here for a day. So even if I leave Tuesday morning,
so it definitely feels more like an anchor as opposed to a tether.
It's definitely an anchor. Yeah, it's definitely not a tether. I always thought I would feel tethered. I always thought that moving back to DC would be. Weird. I always thought it'd be like this strange, like thorn in my side for some reason. Because home, people who, like nobody really likes the place they live. Like everybody loves the place they live except not. Right? Like we always fantasize about other places, right? It's like, oh, when I'm in New York, I was like, yo, I really want to be in New Orleans, right? Or if I'm in DC, I'm like, man, I miss Brooklyn. Right? Or I just came back from LA or San Francisco, the Bay Area, I'm like, yo, I could live in the Bay, right? Like nowhere is good enough. But moving back here, I'm like, this is good. It's good.
So we're here to talk about your amazing novel, Miles Morales, Spider-Man. And in many ways, this is a departure from previous works. At the same time, absolutely not. We're still dealing with this really dope coming of age, this Boricua buildings roman of sorts, where we're looking at a young superhero who is learning about himself, learning about the world around him, and those kind of ideas were great all over the universe. My question is, how did your connection to Marvel and how did you write this piece come about?
So it's big. I got a phone call from my agent. So when you work in children's publishing, this is just to give out a bit of information about how this works. When you work in children's publishing, what happens is once you start making a name for yourself, you start getting phone calls from publishers who want you to do intellectual property. Right? Is attaching to something else. So that he can do this thing for us, we'll pay the set fee, and it'll be lickety split, and then he'll make this thing, right? So over the years, I've gotten these phone calls. So one time, it's like Pharrell Williams, when Happy came out, Penguin calls me and says, yo, Pharrell wants you to do a book around the song Happy. Would you be interested in that? But you can't be, your name not going to be on the book, and you don't get no residuals. And I'm like, what's the name? I mean, like, what exactly would I want to do? Why would I want to do that, right? And I'm all the way grown. Like, Pharrell ain't enough. Like, I'm not, I don't need that, right? I'm like, I meet Pharrell, right? So another time, I remember Willow Smith, her folks called, right? And so when Willow's folks called, they're like, yo, Willow Smith is writing a science fiction novel, and she wants you to be the ghostwriter of this novel. And I'm thinking to myself, they're like, you get to fly out to LA, you get to be in the Smith household, right? Hang out with her, learn her world, and like talk to her about all the things, right? And I'm like, cool. except for the fact that I can't offer her critique because she's a 14-year-old millionaire. And so how do you tell a 14-year-old millionaire that her work ain't good enough? How do you tell a person who's never been critiqued that their work's not up to snuff? And so I said, no, I'm not doing it, right? And so this time when my agent called, she said, yo, I got an opportunity for you. And I'm like, yo, I just want to make my work, right? Like I spent enough time just trying to do my thing. I just want to make my work. And my agent's like, just hear me out. So I'm like, all right, what's going on? She's like, well, I want you, Marvel called, and they want you to do a Spider-Man novel. And I'm like, not interested. And they're like, well, they want you to do a Miles Morales novel. And I'm like, who's Miles Morales? And they're like, well, he's like this kid from Brooklyn who's Spider-Man, and he's half black, half Puerto Rican. And I'm like, all right, I hear you, right? Let's talk about it. So we talked about it a bit, and then I said, okay. And the next thing that happens is they say, well, just Disney, who owns Marvel, said you got to come to New York, and you got to come have a meeting at the Disney office. They want to sort of celebrate this, you signing on for this thing, right? So I show up, and the way it works is New York City, all the publishing companies sit in the middle of the city, right? So like Simon & Schuster, Random House, they're all like in Midtown, Rockefeller Center. It's all like super focal, right? They're all right there. Disney though is off to the side, all the way on the west side, almost on the water, in the middle of nothing, right? So I walk over there and I'm like, yo, where am I? This doesn't even feel like Manhattan. Right, I go into this building and the building is in shambles. There's like tarp hanging from the ceiling. Seriously, like a makeshift podium with a security guard who's already bummed out about everything. Like, right? And I walk in and I'm like, yo, I think I'm here for Disney. And he's like, oh yeah, you in the right place. Just go up to the fourth floor. I'm like, all right. I get upstairs, the elevator door's open, and it's like a museum. You walk in, and all of Walt Disney's pencil sketches are just hanging on the wall. And I'm like, yo, if y'all ever were to get robbed, you know, it's like, yo, all this money on the wall. Yeah, all this money on the wall, like just all over the wall. And I walk in and I meet my editor for the first time, and she says, all right, we're gonna celebrate this whole thing, right? So I'll bring out everybody. So the whole Disney staff comes out into this big lobby. They got like 200 bottles of champagne and like 600 cupcakes. And like, we celebrate you joining the team for Miles Morales. We toast. I'm like, this is amazing. And then they're like, so look, why don't you go ahead and give us your pitch? And I'm like, what you mean? And they're like, just pitch us what you think you want to do for the Miles Morales story. And I hadn't thought about it yet. We just made the decision that I was going to do this deal, right? So I hadn't really thought about it. And so I stand there and I think to myself, well, who were the superheroes when I was a kid? And for kids growing up in black and brown communities, almost across the board, when we think about people with superpowers, we think about the people that we know, especially in high school. You think about the people who are like 19, 20 years old who make it to the NBA, who make it to the NFL. To be a 20-year-old kid who wakes up one day with $10 million in the bank is a superpower. And the funny thing about having that superpower is that everybody else in the community expects this kid who has not ever had this superpower before to be responsible with it, which is crazy, right? Everybody's like, yo, you gotta know. So my issue with Peter Parker from the jump was always, his whole brand was built around the adage, with great power comes great responsibility, but Peter Parker is in high school. I've never met a high school student. I've never met a teenager who's believed that his power comes with responsibility. Teenagers with power exploit the power to make their lives better in high school. That's it, right? And so the first thing I wanted to do, which I'm telling them, as I'm pitching my books here, and I'm about to blow the whole up. Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking they're gonna be like, spit it out, like you're done, right? So I'm like, so I want to do a novel where the first thing we address is the fact that this boy does not necessarily know how to deal with the fact that he has a superpower. The second thing I tell them is I say, look, when you come to in communities of color and marginalized spaces in general, you also have to deal with the fact that there are so many young people, like these NBA players and NFL players, that also have to deal with survivor's guilt. What does it mean for you to be all of a sudden made special? And you live in a mansion on the other side of town, and your family still live in the hood. Your friends still in the projects. Your buddies still struggling to make ends meet. There's a survivor's guilt that comes along with that, and if this kid is who he says he is, he also has to be dealing with the survivor's guilt of having a superpower, right? And the last thing I tell them, when I said, if you are from a black or brown community, and you have been in this country for generations, then unfortunately we also have to address the fact that so many of us have developed a pathology that oftentimes dwells in inferiority. Right? Unfortunately, there are so many of us that have an inferiority complex, even if we don't know that it's there. And so there are so many people who experience great things, or who great things happen to, who don't feel like they deserve it. Just on the strength of their families and their neighborhoods and where they come from, what everybody's been saying their entire lives about them. So when good things happen, they're like, yo, why you, and I talk to kids in juvie, right? And every kid in juvie says, yo, Mr. Jason, why you come see us? And I'm like, what you mean? They say, well, you could have been anywhere in the world, but why you come here? Because they don't believe that they're deserving of having a visitor, right? And so I wanted Miles to experience those things. Now at this point, Disney's like, all right, so what's the plot? This is literally how it went. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, pour me another glass of champagne, right? Right? So they're like, what's the plot? And I'm like, well, look, I'm going to be honest with you. And I told them this, I said, this might be the very thing that makes y'all pull the plug on me. This also might be the very thing for those of y'all in this room that convinces you to not read this book. And if that's the case, that's fine with me. Buy the book anyway because we support independent bookstores, right? So buy the book. But if you don't want to rock with it, you don't got to rock with it.
I'm sold on what you were saying earlier. I'll be 50 in 2 years, and actually, the fact that this is a young adult book, and just the way you describe young boys having, when they think of role models and blah, 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 everything you were saying, I mean, and how your mind went into what made you want to write about this Miles Morales, I'm sold. I'm going to buy my own car.
But if you're not like him and you a hater, it's all good. I still love you. You know what I'm saying? But here's the thing, right? So I'm talking to him about the plot, and I'm like, here's the thing. Here's what I want to talk about. I said, look, if I got an opportunity to shoot my shot, then I'm gonna shoot my shot. If you gonna let me come in here, then I'm gonna swing for the fences. So I said, well, look, I want to write a story using Spider-Man about the school to prison pipeline. Nice. And I'm like, I want to talk about the fact that there are so many kids in this country, and for those of you who don't know what this is, I'll explain. School to prison pipeline, over the last 15 years, they've been doing all this research about how black and brown kids are being disciplined differently in schools, and that they're being disciplined at a much harsher rate and a much more often rate than their white counterparts, right? And what that eventually leads to is a lot of black and brown kids who have been suspended and or expelled. And when you got kids who have been expelled, crime becomes a lot closer. What we tend to forget is that school is not just a space for education and academics. School is also a space for safety for some of these kids. If I'm on the inside of this building, then that means I'm not out there, right? But if you force me out there, then you can't be mad when I make certain decisions to survive, which eventually lead me to the penal system. If you were to run the numbers of black and brown men in jail and to see how many of them have high school diplomas, very, very few. And there's a direct connection to that. So I was like, I want to tell that story in Spider-Man. And I'm like, and they're like, sounds good. Team cheers. And we chose, and then they said you got 28 days to write the book.
You did bring up the idea of survivor's guilt, and there was one part in the plot that speaks to Miles Morales, his spider senses, it feels like it's going on the fritz, and he starts to question what's going to happen to him in the future. And there is a quote where it says, perhaps for a kid like him, being a superhero had an expiration date. And the first thing that I'm reminded of is not something outside of the mythos of Miles Morales, but as a matter of fact, the first time that we're introduced to Miles Morales in comic book form is at a New York charter school lottery. And for any of us who know about the charter school lotteries, we're looking at a number of families who just want their son, who just want their daughter, who just want their child to have a great education, but there aren't enough, there's not enough space for all of these kids, so they sell out this auditorium and they do this lottery. And luckily, the last name to be called is Miles Morales, but in that moment where his father is happy and his mother is happy, all he does is look around and see all of these other kids frustrated. This young Latino boy who's like about to tear up inside. This young Asian girl with a tear down her face, this sense of why is it me? And he says, why is it just me? And so there's a part of me that says this is indeed a Spider-Man book, but you're doing a lot of stuff in this book. You are talking about the school to prison pipeline. You're looking at the ideas of black masculinity. I think this might be an unfair question, but why? That is to say, why so many issues addressed, and addressed very well in this one story and through the one vessel that is Miles Morales?
Oh man, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because all these sort of subplots and all these motifs in the book, it seems like a lot of them, but the truth is that if we were to sort of put them all down on a piece of paper, we recognize that they're all actually interconnected, right? So if we were to take toxic masculinity, right, and look at sort of what toxic masculinity does, and for those of y'all who aren't familiar with this, even though it should be self-explanatory, but if you are unfamiliar, it's just this idea that masculinity in and of itself, right, and they're at the root of it, because we live in a patriarchal country, because of the history of all the things on this earth, over time it's evolved into that which is extraordinarily toxic, meaning the reason that men can't cry is toxic, right, because men need to cry, because it's a human thing. And so if I don't get it out this way, I get it out other ways, right? The fact that we look at women in all kinds of ways except as human. The fact that we raise our young boys to be brute, to be tough, but never to have the other side of them. The fact that we don't think about masculine and feminine in every single human being. Right? All of these ideas, and so I wanted to make sure that I talked about that, but that toxic masculinity is oftentimes directly connected to sort of the ideas of, to the penal system, right, and the decisions that we make. It's directly connected, and the penal system is directly connected to sometimes those kids who didn't get picked, right? That toxic masculinity can show itself in survivor's guilt and how he reacts to that survivor's guilt. Everything is sort of the same, right? And it's an ecosystem. And in every single community, there's an ecosystem, but even better than that, in every single human being, there's also a personal ecosystem where all those things are functioning at the same time within each and every one of us. And I think in order for me to make Miles a whole person, I gotta address the whole situation as best I can in this particular novel.
We have the setting of Brooklyn. We have the setting of New York. And I by all means know that Brooklyn is not Harlem.
No,
but it is not, by no means. And I would not make that kind of connection. At the same time, I feel the smacks of like the new Negro era of the Renaissance within this book. You start us off by pausing for a second and having us read Paul Laurence Dunbar's We Wear the Mask. And then from there, we have the refrain that is You're Just Like Me, which sends us to August Wilson and Troy Maxson and Corey Maxson. Then we're also looking at the way that we are seen. So you're telling us to go to W.E.B. Du Bois and looking at the double consciousness. You're doing all these things. This is not your first situation. This is not your first piece of writing. Your love is in poetry. Your love is in this work. What are some other works, or what are some other mediums that influenced your writing of Miles Morales?
Oh man, I've been on tour for a minute, and these are the toughest questions. Listen, tell me about the book. First of all of your references are spot on, and I gotta tell you, man, like to put Paul Laurence Dunbar at the very beginning of a Spider-Man novel was a personal thing. Just forever and ever and ever, we can associate Paul Laurence Dunbar with Spider-Man. Spider-Man rather with Paul Laurence Dunbar, which to me was like, score, we got one, right? You know what, man? I was influenced obviously by all the things you're talking about, all the literature of the Harlem Renaissance, all of I mean Black American great thinkers and writers were people that I was drawing from, because I don't think that their ideas and their hypotheses, I don't think that they're any different today, right? They're perennial issues, right? These are evergreen. And because they're evergreen, I think that with every generation we'll be able to look at these issues, look at this situation, see how it's evolved and changed and shifted and shaped. And some of these things will sort of become a little bit less potent, and others become even more covert. But I don't necessarily think that they'll ever not be there. Some of these things, I mean, America was built on these sort of issues, and human beings are also wrought with all this stuff as well. It's a part of humanity as well. It's human nature, right? Separation and all these things. We like to believe it's not. The truth is that I'm always looking for the person who's going to make me comfortable. And usually that person who makes me comfortable is the person I share likeness to. That's all. And because of that, though, we also create sort of walls for protection, but walls nonetheless, right? And so I wanted to make sure I used all that work, and also like rereading sort of Between the World and Me, right? Rereading A Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. I mean, the new Jim Crow was a huge help for me. Michelle Alexander, watching 13th over and over and over again, because there's a lot of that, which I'm sure you saw. There's a lot of the 13th stuff and the motif and all that stuff is in there. But really studying all of that kind of literature and all of those ideas were a big part of the story. I mean, for me, dude, I feel like what I kept telling myself was, man, everybody who reads this book is gonna, at least the diehard fans are gonna say that I politicized Spider-Man. And they're gonna, and maybe that'll make people upset. But I also know that if you do your history on the tradition of comic books, they've always been used to do that. That's what they were built to do. So this is in direct tradition, not just with black literature, but with comics. This is what they do. This is why X-Men was made. This is why Spider-Man was made. I mean, do your research on, not that we're talking about DC right now, but do your research on Superman and why Superman was like what it was supposed to be. And I'm just trying to make sure that I pay homage to my history and my legacy and my lineage, and pay homage to the legacy that comic books actually are.
The beauty in young adult fiction and young adult novels is the ability to see yourself, is the ability to have your identity validated. Oftentimes we are made because of the paucity of characters of color, protagonists of color, or rather a paucity of those who have been given the spotlight. We end up having to go through the filter of usually the straight, cis, white male character. Here you've been able to write a character in Miles Morales that speaks to a very specific identity and yet has been very, very universal. I mean, there are many instances where we're in the book and I'm sitting next to him in class and I'm like, this is exactly what my history class was like. Or I have the very same best friend like Ganke. So how did your experience as an educator, not necessarily in the formal forms of education, but also as a student, reflect in Miles Morales? Because those are some of the most powerful moments when we see him in a classroom and experiencing what it feels like to be a person of color at a predominantly white institution.
Yeah. You know what, man? So there were a few things I drew from. So the first thing was my college experience. So I went to the University of Maryland. I was in the English department, and I was one of two black people in my graduating class at the University of Maryland in the English department. And I remember sitting in class my senior year and pitching my thesis. And I've talked about this several times, but I remember pitching my thesis, and my thesis was all about the expansion of the literary canon. Right? I was like, yo, I just feel like we need to expand the canon. Why is the canon locked? If literature continues to evolve, how could we ever lock the canon, right? And so I'm talking to my professor. I'm one of maybe 2 or 3 black students in this particular course, right? And the professor says, absolutely not. The canon should never be expanded. We should never diversify the canon. And I'm like, well, how is it, like, why is that? And he's like, because in order for you to diversify the canon, whatever literature you're suggesting has to make an actual cultural shift in literature. And so I sat there thinking, and I'm thinking, like, so you mean to tell me that Zora Neale Hurston didn't shift literature, right? That she didn't shift it, right? Like, I mean, like, before then, if we were to look at it for what it really is, Zora Neale Hurston, like I always say, she out-Faulkner Faulkner, right? She literally one up this man, right? And did it from an authentic space. And this man told me that she was nowhere near good enough to be in the canon. I said, so Langston Hughes didn't shift the culture. Nope, didn't shift the culture. So Toni Morrison, nope, not even close.
Oh,
nope,
no,
not even close, right? And he went on and on, and he went on and on. We were arguing back and forth, and then I told him, I said, well, I'm going to write it anyway. I'm going to write my thesis anyway. And then I changed the thesis to not only diversifying the canon, but diversifying the canon in school, right? To make sure that if you diversify the canon and you use that in the academic, in the academy, from little kids going up, then it also changes the way that young people, specifically young people of color, feel about literature, right? So we had this argument. So that was the first thing, right? Having a professor, a man I respected, look me in the face and tell me something that was so asinine that he clung to for his own intellectual comforts. Right? It was crazy. The other thing that I use is I'm fortunate enough, and I do mean fortunate enough, to spend 60% of my time or 70% of my time in life with children. Right? I'm with young people all the time. I'm around them all the time. And I get to hear them cry. Right? I was 2-3 nights ago, I was in Chicago, and there were two young women, twin sisters, Tia and Tyra, who come up to me after a signing and burst into tears. And they say, I just don't ever feel like I belong in the spaces that I'm in because I'm always in all white spaces. Right? I just don't feel like I belong. I remember were we with you? I was at another school, a college. Maybe not. I think it was in U.S. Salisbury. Maybe it was Salisbury. I can't remember. No, it was Towson. I was in Towson. And a young woman stood up and said, what should I tell, what advice would you give me as a black girl in an all-white class where every time I raise my hand to say something, either I'm tamped down by my professor, I'm belittled by my classmates, they smirk at me, they ignore me, they talk, what do you think I should do? Right? So this happens, like we like to believe that all these things are like, are fantasy. We like to believe that none of these things are real, but the truth of the matter is that they're very real. They're very real. They're not always malicious, but they're definitely real. Right? They're definitely real, and I think I just use all of that. I mean, I got like, I'm black. I live in this world. I look like this, right? All the time.
All the time.
This is what it is. And I move around in spaces. This is probably more black people that are signing for me than I've ever had. Right? I move around in spaces where people don't look like me, and that's okay. But I always know what I look like. I always know who I am and what I look like and what that means. Right? I've stood on elevators as recent as a month ago, 2 months ago, stood on elevators by myself, and the door opens and a white mom and a white daughter. I'm like, you guys getting on it? Like, no, we'll wait for the next one. But no one's in the elevator with me. The elevator's wide open, mad space, right? Right? So it happens, man. I just want to be honest about it. I knew that at the end of the day, I shouldn't have to write a story where I'm afraid and ashamed and tiptoe around that which is cultural and that which is real. And nobody else ever has to do it, right? If I were to write a story, like if I'm reading about Islam or a young Muslim girl, I get to be a young Muslim girl in the book. I can put it all in there because it's so rich culturally. If I'm reading about a Jewish kid, I can put all the history of Judaism in the book and all the rituals in the book. But if I'm a black American, because of our history, because of the way it's all been sussed out, everyone is afraid. Not just white people, black people are terrified if I were to put unapologetic blackness in a book, because they think this might be the only time that you just shot your shot and now you blew it. Because no one's gonna let you do it again. Right? That's the reason that you see it like that.
Wow. Yeah.
My Lord. In this instance, it says, I want to no longer be a Negro poet. I want to be a poet who just happens to be Negro.
Amen.
And so then a challenge to the young artists of the time, Langston Hughes says, there can never be a time when you are writing with your identity put to the back burner. And he even goes on to say, and Lord knows I'm not doing the quote justice, but this idea of if white people like what we're doing, great. If they don't, we don't care. If black people like what we're doing, great. If they don't, we don't care. And my question was kind of with that in mind, did you have that fear when you were making these beautiful black cultural touchstones? Like, I'm in a barbershop and I'm in a barbershop waiting to get my haircut with Miles. I'm listening at the kitchen table. I'm listening to his father just like, why are you talking about the time that I wet the bed? And I'm like, my dad most definitely. That was in confidence. Why are you telling me that? So did you find yourself ever at the point where, wait a minute, is this too specific to a particular culture, a particular demographic? They might not get it. I mean, Bruce Lee came through, and I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I forgot to say that's right. Y'all know Bruce the comedian? I put that in. Comic View, all that's in there. I was wilding out with that one. That's great. You know what, man? So here's the truth. The truth is sure, right? I'm human, and I work in this industry. I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't come to the table with my own insecurities about how this is all going to go down. Of course. I also use this. This is my career, right? This is something that I like. This is my livelihood, right? And so all those things are always at the forefront of my mind, right? I got to make sure that everybody is taken care, that I'm taken care of, and that this is going right. But there are also greater stakes. Right? And I had to sort of weigh that out. The other thing, though, to the credit of Marvel and Disney, and I want to make sure this is clear, especially since they're recordings and people probably tweeting and all of that. To the credit of Marvel and Disney, and this is real, when I turned in the first draft, it was rough. I mean, it was like, I went all the way, and I'm thinking to myself, yo, there's no way they're gonna let this flop. And they sent me my editorial letter maybe 2 weeks later, and I'm like, all right, here comes the hammer, right? They're like, start over here, right? And what the letter actually says is, hey, so we see what you're doing, and we can tell that you're eggshelling. So if you're gonna do it, then let's do it.
Nice.
And at that point, I was like,
And in the book, we are focused on Miles Morales, and I want to do a quick thing because I know most of us, if not all of us, are familiar with the character. But Miles Morales is the result, in many ways, of Marvel being more progressive in their character development, as well as a gigantic push for fantasy casting way back in 2011 for Donald Glover in place of Andrew Garfield. And from that, there was this initial backlash of no, Spider-Man can't be black, Peter Parker can't be black. If we're gonna make Spider-Man black, then let's make Black Panther white, all these kind of stuff. So, Donald Glover does the jokes like way better than I can do the explanation. But we end up getting Miles Morales. We end up getting this half black, half Puerto Rican kid from Brooklyn who indeed gets bitten by a spider, but from there his story deviates dramatically and beautifully from Peter Parker. And so we're here with the story. So digging deeper into the story and digging deeper into the characters of the story, we have Miles Morales, and he has this great story, but he is not the only character here. And he is, and the other supporting characters do more than just simply kind of sing in the background. Can you talk about how you developed those characters and gave them the justice they deserve by making them so rounded and so dynamic?
Yeah, man. So here's the thing, man. The first thing I wanted to do. So when I did all my research on Miles, the first thing that became really, really glaring to me, just really weird, is that he comes from a family of criminals. And I was like, yeah, no comment. He comes from a family of criminals. And I'm like, man, right? Like, seriously? So my very first decision was, there's no way that I can write a story about a young man who comes from a family of criminals unless we figure out and discuss how his family was criminalized. Right? Like, I'm not about to, if you're looking for poverty porn, you're not going to get it. Like, I'm just not going to do it, right? So let's figure out what exactly criminalizes family so that we can humanize these people instead of saying like, yo, his uncle and his father were robbers and like all this stuff that sort of was written into the story, which is fine, except it needs to be fleshed out and it needs to be sort of made more whole. So I said, all right, let's figure that out first, right? Let's figure that out first, which is also where the school prison pipeline story started to tie in. So that was the first thing. The second thing was his father, right? I wanted to discuss his father, and the beauty of writing this tale was the comic book had a lot of holes. And maybe that's because there's a longer scope in developing a story, right? In fairness, because I want to make sure, because the first thing is people are like, yo, Bendis made Miles Morales, so at the end of the day, I at least gotta respect the brother for doing that, right? Like I'm not about to be slandering Bendis because there wouldn't be a Miles Morales, right? So like shouts to Bendis. But because the comic book world has such a long arc, right? You can kind of like, it just works differently when you're writing a novel, right? But I can't have those holes because my peers will tear me apart, right? The readers, it's a very different ballgame, right? So when I was thinking about Miles' father, I'm like, all right, Miles' father, the first thing that stood out to me was that Miles' father, anybody know his name?
Jefferson
Davis. His father's name is Jefferson Davis. For those of y'all who don't know Jefferson Davis, which you all should know, but if you don't know, He was the president of the Confederacy and arguably the biggest proponent of racism in American history, of slavery specifically in American history. His father's name was Jefferson Davis, so I'm like, oh, stop. So I gotta figure that out. Right? But in figuring that out, I got to make his character whole. I got to figure out, like, what can I do to sort of figure this out. The other thing that came up that stood out was Miles' mom. Her name is Rio Morales, and she's Puerto Rican. And traditionally speaking, not that it has to be traditional, but traditionally speaking, she'd probably be Catholic, which means she'd probably also take her husband's last name, which means Miles' name would be Miles Davis, which is also hilarious. but it also added plot. I was like, okay, well, I gotta figure, because I have to figure that out, because if not, my homie's gonna say, hey, yo, Jay, like, this is there's a lot of holes in the story that you're in, right? So I had to figure that out, right? Even Ganke, right? Ganke is a Korean kid, but Ganke is not a Korean name. Ganke is actually, after all my research, Ganke is a Japanese name. Oh. And because of the literature industry, and because of the push to not make these mistakes, my head is on a chopping block if I don't fix that. It's a wrap for me if I don't fix that, right? And it should be fixed. It should be fixed, so I had to figure that out. And in figuring out how to close the holes, I also got to figure out how to round the characters, right? Because I had to focus on them. They couldn't be auxiliary, they couldn't be satellite, because they had problematic issues that needed to be fixed. And so by default, I had to round them out, and it just so happened that also, I mean, like as a writer, you got to round them out anyway, but it just added an extra element.
The book is filled with great scenes of action. We get to see Miles doing his thing, using all of his powers. It's great. I got a little bowl of popcorn when I'm reading it sometimes. And then when we don't see him like back in the suit, back behind the mask, he's in the classroom and he's dealing with the stress of being 16. Like 16 was a time, you know. There we go. I mean, it's like, so I found myself looking at, yes, Miles Morales as this young brother going through things and really coming of age in this story, and I also see this hero who has to tackle a more unique villain in this case. And me being the person who's like thinking way too deep about everything, I'm like, okay, the title is Miles Morales Spider-Man, and it's like we have Miles Morales first. So my question to you, and again, I'm asking all these unfair questions.
Yeah, it's good.
Did you or do you see this work? Do you see your work as a Miles Morales novel, or do you see your work as a Spider-Man novel? Or are they mutually exclusive in the way that in the premise that I've established?
Well, I mean, you know, I see my particular version of Miles Morales as a Miles Morales novel. Because I think that once Miles Morales puts on a Spider-Man mask, we already know what happens, right? Like, Spider-Man. So once a Spider-Man mask comes on, we can almost predict the next 10 pages. Or at least we can predict that 10th page. Because we know that he's going to win. We know he's going to fight. We know there's going to be some back and forth for a while. And then ultimately, he's going to be the victor. Because he's Spider-Man. We know that. Everybody knows that, right? So for me, instead of you focusing on that, which in my world, in my mind, would have been a waste of page. Because we already know it. We already know it. I'm more interested in, like, how do we figure out why he's the kind of Spider-Man that he is? And that comes from who he is as a person, his family, his community, his background, his history, his bloodline, all these things, right? And for me, I'd rather focus on that. The other thing is, I knew that this was going to be marketed toward younger people. And I needed to make sure they saw as much of themselves. And if I could, the lion's share of this book needed to be them, right? Like, literally, the recycling of that image, them seeing themselves over and over, every page, right? And them understanding, and I won't spoil it for those who haven't read it, but them also understanding that superpowers are not, a superpower is not you shooting web from your hand, or you having superhuman strength, or you jumping from the ground to the top of a building. A superpower for all of us is integrity, right? Willpower. If you were to really look at Peter Parker, right? If you really think about what spidey-sense is, it's discernment. That's all. It's discernment, right? It's literally the same thing that all of us have. All of us have it, except the way that we see it in the sort of Spider-Man sort of framework is that it is sort of larger than life. The truth is that spidey-sense is just discernment. And I wanted to make sure that I distilled the story and distilled what it means to be a superhero and to have a superpower down to its most like infinitesimal state where it's like, yo, you do know 16-year-old boy on the south side of DC, you got all the same powers this guy got. You do know little girl in Harlem, you got all the same powers that this dude got. Right? Or all the powers. I mean, you see in the story there's Alicia. Alicia, for those of you who don't know, my mom's like, yeah, like mom. Hi, mom. I wish my mom read all the books, and she even read this one. And she called me, and she was like, Jason, I don't know what the hell is going on in this story. I have no idea what this book is about. And I'm like, Spider-Man, and she said, there's not been a Spider-Man moment in the story. but there's Alicia. Alicia is sort of this young lady in this class. Right, and this young lady in this class, literally, when you read the story, you'll see that she does nothing extraordinary except she does everything extraordinary. She has all the superpowers he has, if not more, but we don't think about it that way, right? And that's the whole reason that was sort of my premise around like which version of Spider-Man is he? It's all Miles, and a little bit of Spider-Man, at least Spider-Man by name, but really it's all just Miles.
I only had just a couple questions and nothing low.
I just want to make sure we get them.
Yeah, because I'm gonna be on that talk.
No, you're the best.
Yeah.
I'm going back in 2A school because I'm a teacher, right? Like this is just how I have to function in the world. And I'm noticing if I'm not doing it, it's providing my kids with books that eliminate levels of invisibility and validate their identity. If I'm not doing it, then it's not going to happen. Very, very quickly with an anecdote, I'm teaching 9th grade in DCPS. We start off with fences. Okay, we can work with that. I'm working at Ron Brown, an all-boys school. So we're doing fences. Then after that, we are doing Snippets from the Bluest Eye, and then we're doing Killer Angels and Romeo and Juliet. These are great pieces of work, but at the same time, my young boys are already saying, sellers, we have not yet seen a black man who's doing right, quote unquote. We get a Troy Maxon who's a little bit troubled. We get a Charlie who, my lord, and then we're reading Killer Angels, wherein we have these young black boys who are made to try to look at the honor that's found within the Confederacy. So, as an educator and as a writer, where do you see this novel as far as curriculum goes? Where would you like to see this in the classroom? Or how would you like to see this used in the classroom? That would be my question as a teacher.
I think, you know what, I think, man, you really are, right? You know what, I think, look, I think, first of all, I think that if we were, for all my educators in the room, have to be creative, right? And this is an easy way for us to get creative. I think this book in general can be used to do all the other things that every other book does. It's got the historical value in it. We can talk about the legacy of, because the Constitution is in this joint. Like the 13th Amendment is a huge part of the novel, right? We can use that as jump off points. We can also use it to talk about symbolism, because as you know, the book is chock full of symbolism, right? The cat o' nine tails, the cats everywhere, and like there's a lot of symbolism, as you know. All the symbolism in the book we can use to talk about it starts off with Paul Laurence Dunbar, the same connections that you made, you can use to challenge young people to make those same connections by creating intersections and all sorts of comparative literature, right? Use it if we were to take something like Spider-Man and hold it up against, I don't know, Man-Child of the Promised Land, or like hold it up against something that's talking about outsiderness, right? Or hold it up against The Invisible Man, right? And to do comparative literature courses around the two books, I think comparative lit always works though. If young people really knew that Empire, the show, was based on King Lear, then King Lear makes more sense, right? If young people knew that Romeo and Juliet is every single love story they've ever read and ever seen,
Right.
then it would make a little more sense to me, right? And so I'm all about using it, and not just by itself, but using it as sort of like a leveraging point to help them, because they're going to need to know those other books. If they go to college, those books are still going to be there. So using it as a way to draw connections, where they don't have to feel like, yo, all of these books aren't for me. It's like, no, this is yours. This one is yours. And so with your book, we can hold it up against the ones that you don't think are for you to better understand all the things happening between the two books, right? That sweet spot in the middle, which is really where the education is. And that is what I would suggest to any educator out there. Use it as a partnering book to help to draw kids. It's Spider-Man. Right? It's just a draw. Use it as the draw. And I think you go a little smooth. Shout out to the educators and the booksellers and the librarians and all of y'all.